Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We're going to look at this question or this article, which is titled Did the original scribes write the Distigmai in Codex Vaticanus B of the Bible? And so we're going to look at this. This is the latest research from Nehemiah Gordon. Now, when I interviewed Nehemiah a few weeks back, he was saying that he's quite restricted on what he could say about Codex Vaticanus. So I didn't really bother going there because there wasn't really anything that he could add to that. And I also wanted to spend time talking about Revelation 16:5, the past, the present, and the future in the name of Jehovah. And so I think that was time well spent. Now, seeing I've just interviewed Nehemiah Gordon and he couldn't really talk about this. When this article came out, I noticed straight away that down the bottom here, it says, this is copyrighted Nehemiah Gordon, 2024. And it says, this is an open access article distributed under the terms. And so it's got this 4.0 license. So it's we're free to share, adapt. And so basically I can read this online. So I actually asked someone on the Textus Receptus Academy if this was fine. And so they showed me that and said, yeah, you can read this online. So, so this is just, I'm only just reading this because it interests those who are wanting to examine Codex Vaticanus, wanting to scientifically test the ink in Codex Vaticanus and also Codex Sinaiticus. So there are people who hold to a Textus Receptus King James position who want these things tested. Now, we know that many people have come along over the years and have protested against these manuscripts, people like Dean John William Burgon, many people from like even the Dean Burgon Society, many groups, Trinitarian Bible Society, etc. And oftentimes people are crying out for these manuscripts to be scientifically tested. We have a lot of technology today that can detect frauds, that can also date manuscripts closer to paleographers and what they used to be able to do back 100, 200 years ago. And so this is of interest to everyone who has that in mind. And so I'm just basically going to read through this and hopefully I can make this palatable. So in other words, if there's something a little bit technical, I might be able to explain it. If not, I might be able to look it up. But I don't want to get too caught in the weeds. I just want to go through this article, explain what it means, and then we can move on from there. So obviously this is from the Vatican Library. Yes, the Vatican. Obviously that's why it's called Vaticanus. The Vatican Library Review. Did the original scribes write the Distigmai in Codex Vaticanus B of the Bible? So this is the number for Vaticanus. Vaticanus, Greek number 1209. So the first scholar mentioned here is Nehemiah Gordon, and so it's got all his credentials there. There are several others: Patrick Andrist from Germany, Oliver Hahn from Germany, Pavlos D. Vasiliadis. Hopefully I've said your name correctly. And so he is from Texas, but from the Institute of the Hebrew Bible Manuscript Research. And he's actually in the University of Thessaloniki. That's interesting. Nelson Calvillo, also from Texas. Ira Rabin from Germany. And so this was received the 30th of August, 2024. Accepted on the 6th of October 2024 and is published online the 17th of December. So it's just the 20th today, and so it's only a few days old. So this is the abstract. The 4th century Greek Bible manuscript, Codex Vaticanus B, Vatican Greek 1209, contains pairs of horizontally aligned marginal dots known as Distigmai, which correspond to textual variants in other manuscripts. The production of the Distigmai has been variously dated to the 4th or the 16th centuries. A 4th century date would prove the early existence of hundreds of textual variants, many of which are otherwise only witnessed by later manuscripts. So what that means to people is that if they could test this manuscript and it was a 4th century manuscript, because people are assuming that it's a 4th century manuscript based upon paleography. Now, if they can test these dots and turn around and say, well, you've got these dots at these specific textual variation marks. So say, for example, 1 John 5:7, that means they knew of 1 John 5:7 in the 4th century, and they've marked it so in the text, so that where they've omitted it, they've actually got a notation saying that they recognize that there is a difference there between that and other manuscripts. So what that would do is cause Vaticanus to be a witness to the Byzantine readings or specific Textus Receptus readings and things like that. But if it's dated, so that's if it's 4th century, if it's dated 16th century, that means that it was probably someone like Sepultiva who was writing to Erasmus, and he sent 365 readings to Erasmus, and most probably went through these particular places where there were differences in the 16th century. Okay, so a lot of people have been very interested in this. Near infrared microscope reflectology combined with micro X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, it's quite a word, proved that the Distigmai, both those categorized as apricot, which are visually similar to the ink of the original main text, and chocolate, which are visually similar to the re-inking of the main text. So you had the main text, and then you have someone's gone over the main text and written over it. So you'll see that, because we've got pictures here that we can look at as well. Were written with inks made from chemically putrefied vitriol, a process that only became standard in the 16th century. Okay. As a result, there is no reasonable chance that the Distigmai were written in the 4th century. Horizontal lines that have been hypothesized to function as text critical oboloi were written in the same ink as the original main text, which differs completely from that of the Distigmai. So I've got to get the exact way that this is said. So usually the best way that I can find to work out these letters is to go to English and play it in Google Translate. Distigmai, that's pretty basic. In other words, the Distigmai and horizontal lines tested were not produced during the same writing session as are separated by more than 1,000 years, making it impossible for them to have functioned as code-joining text critical symbols of the 4th century. Keywords: Bible manuscripts, New Testament, textual criticism, Septuagint, XRF, Greek paleography, paratextual features, obolos. Now I'll throw that one in to translate. That's the Australian way. Obolos. I don't think that's how it's pronounced. Maybe Obolos. Obolos. That sounds good to me. Okay, so Codex Vaticanus B is among the most important manuscripts of the Bible in Greek. Yeah, to some people. To me, it's corruption. But anyway, I'll just continue reading. It was written in majuscule script in the 4th century and mostly laid out in 3 columns. The Codex preserves most of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Some pages were replaced in minuscule script in the 15th century. So maybe I should go through these footnotes as I go as well. So that first footnote was talking about the importance of Codex Vaticanus. Oops, it's gone to a website, which is not good. Here we go. Back to the original. For some reason, it's got active clickable links there. I just sort of clicked on it to scroll down. So it's just got the details there. Excuse me. I just muted myself there while I did a big cough. Okay, the importance of Codex Vaticanus for the New Testament research can be measured by the recently published dissertation. And so, yeah, they're talking about the importance of Vaticanus there. So the second footnote there is talking about replacement pages. Some pages were replaced. So there's Genesis 1, or almost all of Genesis, some of the Psalms, and then in Hebrews and from Hebrews 9:15 to 13 and the book of Revelation are all replacements. And so it's got all the list of things there. A scribe re-inked the entire manuscript, systematically tracing over faded letters with new ink. This re-inking obscured the original shapes of the letters, making it difficult to differentiate between the original hands that wrote the manuscript. So footnote 3 is just Kenyon and Metzger, Milne and Skeet. This is a major reason why there is no consensus as to whether the original text was produced by 2, 3, or 4 scribes. And so maybe I shouldn't keep going down to the footnotes, because some of them are just footnotes. They're not really. So like when you're reading Young Crimes material, you'll get down to something like this, and it's like a Bible study, you know, and so you feel like you have to read it. But this just looks like it's just pages and just sort of explanation. So I'll just keep reading. This is a major reason why there's no consensus as to whether the original text was produced by 2, 3, or 4 scribes. Nevertheless, the re-inker did leave many letters and words unre-inked, especially in the case of what he considers to be errors. Pietro Versace recently carried out a thorough survey of over 30 different scribal features, arguing that Codex Vaticanus was re-inked twice, first in the 10th or 11th century and again in the 16th century. So the Distigmai debate. Discovery of the Distigmai, or another word for that is amulets. In 1995, Philip B. Payne identified pairs of horizontally aligned dots in the margins of Codex Vaticanus that he originally called amulets, but which were later dubbed Distigmai, singular Distigmi, meaning 2 dots. The number of Distigmai has been estimated between 765 and 858. According to Payne, the original scribe of Codex Vaticanus had access to other manuscripts in the 4th century, which he systematically compared to Codex Vaticanus, marking the location of the textual variants with Distigmai in figure 1. So we're going to see that, or I may as well show you that now. So this is figure 1. So it says a Distigmai, or 2 dots. So there's a Distigmai. I'll make this a little bit bigger. There we go. in the left margin of Codex Vaticanus 1474A20, according to Philip Payne, this Distigmai, and so I'm not really familiar with the distinction between Distigmai and Distigmai, so I might just quickly grab that and put it into translate. Distigmi seems like a singular example, or the Distigmai seem like an overall, a plural term. According to Philip Payne, this Distigmi and the adjacent horizontal line, so I guess that's there, horizontal line, are an example of the so-called Distigmai obolos pair, indicating that the original scribe of Codex Vaticanus in the 4th century was aware of other manuscripts that omitted the verses in 1 Corinthians 14:34-35, telling women to be silent in the church. So this is one of those hotly contested ones. It's a bit like when Bart Ehrman finds something a little bit saucy, he runs with it. So the guy who was looking at these dots, he ran with this, and he believes that this whole section was sort of put in where it shouldn't be in there, and but we'll see later that it actually should be in there. Telling women to be silent in the church. He argued that both the Distigmi and the horizontal line were re-inked in the Middle Ages. According to Kurt Nickum and Pietro Versace, the Distigmi was added in the 15th or 16th century, and the horizontal line is an unrelated 4th century paragraphos. So coming from the Greek, para, alongside, and graphos, writing, which divided the text into sense units. So that was completely unrelated, this line here. So that's interesting. Okay, so that was pointed to us in the text here. So we'll just keep reading. In 2000, Payne, along with, I think that's Monsignor Paul Cannart of the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana, yeah, it seems like that would be Monsignor from the Vatican, married, no pun intended there, guys, carried out groundbreaking work by carried out groundbreaking work by directly examining Codex Vaticanus with the naked eye and magnifying glass and a 7 times magnification loupe with an internal illumination. They proposed a dichotomy of original apricot Distigmai and chocolate re-inked Distigmai, with visual observations as the only available criterion. They correctly noticed that the color of the apricot Distigmai matched the original re-inked text, whereas the chocolate Distigmai corresponded to the dark brown ink of the re-inker. They also found 2 instances of apricot Distigmai protruding from the chocolate Distigmai. Based on this, they argued that the chocolate Distigmai were the product of re-inking original apricot Distigmai. Notable exceptions are Distigmai that Payne argued were added by the re-inker, or possibly an unspecified latter hand, and therefore do not have apricot Distigmai hidden underneath them. The overwhelming statistical correspondence between the Distigmai and textual variants known from modern critical editions further suggests to Payne and Cannart that the chocolate Distigmai were likely to be re-inkings of earlier apricot Distigmai, as they explained in their 2000 study. So this is their argument here. So the ink of most of the amulets, so amulets is just a synonym for Distigmai, in the Vaticanus New Testament matches the chocolate brown ink of the reinforced text. It is plausible if Codex Vaticanus had only 11 original amulets that a later scribe would have identified their purpose, let alone expanded their use. It is implausible. Yeah. I just got a bit lost there. Also, it is implausible that a scribe half a millennium later would simply by chance have used the same symbol that the original scribe had used to mark the location of textual variants, especially since it never became conventional after the writing of Vaticanus in the 4th century for scribes to use amulets for this purpose. Thus, it is far less likely that the reinforcer in the Middle Ages originated these amulets than that he simply traced over them while reinforcing the rest of the text. It is reasonable to expect that the chocolate brown amulets the reinforcer traced, like the text itself, and the apricot amulets that were not reinforced also date to the original writing of the Codex. So these guys were saying that they could be original. They're saying that because he went back over some of these in the Middle Ages, it doesn't really make sense that people would do that. Hence, according to this hypothesis, most of the chocolate Distigmai correspond to the locations of the original apricot Distigmai, which were in turn of the original 4th century production of the Codex or added soon thereafter. The original Distigmai, both those written with apricot ink and those supposedly re-inked in the Middle Ages with chocolate ink, correspond to places where a 4th century scribe compared Codex Vaticanus with other manuscripts and found textual variants. In their 2009 study, Payne and Kennard reiterated this hypothesis. So it says, Distigmai matching the dark chocolate color ink used to reinforce the entire manuscript in the Middle Ages were probably reinforced along with the rest of the manuscript. Unless there is evidence to the contrary, the presumption is that the dark chocolate colored Distigmai are reinforcements of original apricot colored Distigmai and also date to the original writing of Codex Vaticanus, or at least to the early period when it was in the scriptorium with manuscripts whose variants they note. If the 700 plus Distigmai are original, their importance is immense for textual criticism of the New Testament. J. Edward Miller, who accepted the originality of the Distigmai, explained, hundreds of variants emerging only in latter manuscripts can now be dated to the 4th century with some measure of confidence. Lastly, for those marked lines failing to yield extant variants, New Testament scholars must acknowledge the likelihood that some variants known to exist in the early 4th century have been lost. So that's what I was explaining before. So it sort of would defend a lot of Byzantine readings. And so, in other words, according to this hypothesis, the Distigmai serve as a 4th century witness for numerous variants only known from latter manuscripts or the Byzantine. Furthermore, when a Distigmai does not correspond to a significant variant known from other manuscripts, it opens the door for conjectural emendations that can, in a sense, be categorized as textual variants, employing the Distigmai as a witness. So basically, a conjectural emendation is sometimes, usually the concept of a conjecture is usually when you're looking through a text and you see something, you go, oh, that's a conjecture. But when you're doing that work, it's called you doing a conjectural emendation. Now, usually you can have emendations from a manuscript, which is just emendation means you're just changing something. So either from a manuscript or from reasoning. So you can have homoioteliton or parablepsis or something like that. And so sometimes a conjectural emendation can just be like Dan Wallace has described, the concept of in We the People of the United States, in order to form a more perfect onion, everyone knows it should be union. When it's talking about the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. And so it's not a cookbook. It's nothing to do with onions. It's to do with the union. So people just instinctively know that it's a mistake. And so sometimes conjectural imitations can be something like that. But so I just thought I'd explain that, because conjectural imitation can be something that can go over a lot of people's heads, and they don't understand what it is. And so what they're saying here is you could have witnesses to Byzantine readings when they're actually not there, but just by dating the manuscripts back. So it's a bit like someone just having a list of, like, imagine just having a scripture list. Let's just imagine the numbering system in the Bible. John 3:16 is original. Imagine something like that. And if someone just found a list and they all just so happen to be omissions, like in the critical text, and they're Byzantine readings, well, you mightn't have the whole reading there, but you know that it existed because someone wrote it down. These should be in the Bible or whatever. So that's one of the, like a conjectural imitation is one of the things, like with the Codex Valdensis, because it says in the preface, to 1 John there, that unfaithful scribes were taking out the Common Johannium. And then when you look at the text, it's taken out. And so people are like, well, that's a reference to it. But it actually says the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit. So it actually is a reference to it. But it's sort of like showing that unfaithful scribes were doing that. So when you look at some of these older manuscripts, you're like, hang on, that's been taken out. So anyway, I'm trying to explain that conjectural imitation. I don't think it really matters that much. It's only just a passing term, but hopefully I haven't confused you more. Color and date of the Distigmai. Payne and Kennard initially observed that 11 amulets ambiguously match the original ink of Codex Vaticanus, which is correct based on a strictly visual assessment. Payne later identified a further batch of apricot Distigmai in the 1999 facsimile edition of Codex Vaticanus. So you've got to understand that most people had not seen Vaticanus. Like if you went to the Vatican, you were lucky to just see a few pages. For someone to actually go through and collate the manuscript or research it, it was very few people on the planet who could do that. And so when Vaticanus became more photographed and then eventually came online, that's when a lot of this material has come out. And so in 2009, Kenner examined these Distigmai, finding some new ones in the process, first with the naked eye, and then with a magnifying glass, and finally with different types of lupus. In 2022, Payne referenced another apricot Distigmai that he identified in the facsimile edition, and so that's interesting. I remember there was a call for help with the facsimile edition, and I answered that call, and I think they sort of figured out who I was and said, we don't need your help. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Although this was not confirmed by a direct examination of the original. So it's just looking at, either online pictures or, obviously here it says a facsimile. So like a printed edition. This made for a total of 54 apricot Distigmai, 53 of which were confirmed through direct examination of Codex Vaticanus. Paragraphoi, small horizontal marginal lines. Throughout the New Testament portion of Codex Vaticanus, horizontal lines in the margin mark a new section. These horizontal lines, usually dubbed paragraphoi, are often accompanied by a space in the text where the new section begins. In his original 1995 study, Payne argued that some horizontal lines, when accompanied by a Distigmai, served as an obolos. See figures 1 12, 14, and 16. Okay, so we already looked at this one here. And let's go to 12. See where that is. Okay, that's figure 2, so we must be right down the bottom of the page. Maybe I won't go there. Oh yeah, there's figure 15. So I think we'll just avoid those for the moment. So I'm just going to confuse myself. So I'm sort of trying to work out a bit of a method to read this without confusing everyone and making everyone annoyed. Okay, so the oboloi are known in Codex Vaticanus in the prophets, where they mark text in the Greek that does not appear in the Hebrew. Indeed, there are a number of explicit notes in the prophets portion of Codex Vaticanus that explain the lines marked with oboloi are omitted in the Hebrew. According to this hypothesis, the Distigmai obolos combination in the New Testament serves as co-joining symbols that mark textual variants of 4 or more words. Payne identified 15 Distigmai obolos pairs that he maintained were written by the original scribe of Codex Vaticanus. However, he only identified the original apricot-colored ink in 3 of the Distigmai and one of the horizontal lines in these 15 Distigmai obolos pairs. Accordingly, the original apricot-colored ink in the remaining 12 Distigmai and 14 oboloi in these 15 pairs should presumably be hidden beneath the dark ink of the re-inker. Reception of Payne's hypothesis. In a postscript to their 2009 joint study, cannot distinguish between the phenomena that he and Payne discovered and the interpretation of these phenomena, calling for further investigation to confirm or qualify Payne's conclusions. Christian Bernard Amfuchs accepted the 4th century origin of the Distigmai and noted a consensus about their text critical function. However, Amfuchs, I think I'm saying that right, Amfo explained them as stemming from a comparison of Codex Vaticanus with Old Latin rather than Greek manuscripts. Kurt Nickham also accepted the text critical function of the Distigmai, but argued that they were added in the 15th century or later. This scholar noted that there were Distigmai on the first page of the last quire of Codex Vaticanus, which was replaced in the 15th century by a scribe writing in minuscule script. So that's very interesting, because there are some certain sections in Vaticanus that were done in the 15th century. And so he's noticed these same type of dots were there, so that's interesting. Smart scholar. Although it was possible that the minuscule copyist reproduces these Distigmai from a damaged 4th century page, he found it more likely that the Distigmai postdated this 15th century replacement quire. He also suggested that the Distigmai might have been added by the Spanish humanist Juan Gines de Sepultiva. So that's the guy I'm talking about, who was in correspondence with Desiderius Erasmus. So Erasmus was the first one to publish the Textus Receptus. The Complutensian guys, they did it before him, but they didn't publish until a few years later. So he served under the Curia in Rome under Pope Clement VII. In 1533, Sepultiva sent the Dutch scholar Erasmus a list of 365 textual variants in Codex Vaticanus. Although this list is no longer extant, the extant meaning we don't have it today, but we know about it, Erasmus later cited 4 readings from Codex Vaticanus, each of which is marked in the Codex itself with a Distigmai in the margin. According to Nickum, it was probably Sepultiva who marked over 700 textual variants in Codex Vaticanus with the Distigmai, but sufficed with only 365 of these variants in his letter to Erasmus. James Snap, who we just interviewed, I think it was last week, argued that Sepultiva actually wrote 765 in his now lost original letter to Erasmus, but when the letter was published in 1557, it was mistakenly changed to 365. So that is an option. That's an interesting theory. So this is Peter Gurry, James Snap, and so they're talking about that there. So let's continue. For the past 30 years, the strongest argument against Nickum's late dating has been the correspondence in color between the apricot Distigmai and nearby re-inked main text, contrasted with the visual correspondence between the chocolate Distigmai and the re-inking of the main text. So in other words, that they were like, well, this ink in the margin looks like it's the original hand. So that was what people were thinking. It looks like, and if it's a 4th century document, then this proves Byzantine reading, sort of thing. In recent years, Pietro Versace had access on various occasions to the original during his thorough inventory of the marginalia of Codex Vaticanus. Versace dated the Distigmai to the 16th century based on their similarity to the Vulgate chapter numbers inscribed in the margin of the New Testament portion of Codex Vaticanus in Arabic numerals. He noted that the color of the ink of these Arabic numerals is identico to that of the Distigmai. One of Versace's examples is an apricot Distigmai in the left margin of 1276, capital C31. Versace compared this apricot Distigmai to the Arabic numeral 8 in the right margin of 1276 B34, arguing that they had the same color, stesso couleur, like my accent. He also noted that the Arabic numerals often have dots on either side of the number, which are the same form or former as the Distigmai. Versace concluded that the Distigmai were probably added in the 16th century by the same hand that added the chapter numbers and Arabic numerals. Hence, two competing arguments, Payne and Kennard versus Versace, date the Distigmai variously to the 4th century or to the 16th century based on visual appraisal of their color being the same as some other textual element of known date re-inked text versus Arabic numerals, respectively. Overall, the hypothesis about the text critical function of the Distigmai received large acceptance in the scholarly communities despite disagreement about their date, whereas the hypothesis that the New Testament portion of Codex Vaticanus contain horizontal lines that function as oboloi has been generally rejected. Okay, so preliminary methodological considerations. You got a lot of long words here. Microscopic reflectography. Our research aimed to determine the similarities and dissimilarities between inks of different scribal features. Okay, there we have Nehemiah Gordon. I'll just finish our sentence and we'll go back up there. Based on material science instrumental analysis rather than visual appearance and color alone. Our instrumental approach was based on an ink study protocol routinely employed by the BAM since 2012. So I'm not sure who the BAM is, but we might find that out. In short, we start with the identification of the ink type based on the optical properties of three main classes of ink used in Europe and in the Middle East since late antiquity. These three ink classes correspond to A, soot ink, a fine dispersion of carbon pigments in a water-soluble binder; B, extracts from tree bark known as plant or tannin ink; and finally C, iron gall ink produced through a chemical reaction between bivalent iron and gallic or tannic acid derived from either gall nuts or tree bark. Interaction with near infrared light is indicative of an ink type that can be visualized by a simple camera with an infrared filter. We used a non-invasive, non-destructive USB microscope Dynalight, and it's got the details there, to compare ink images registered in visible and near infrared light. No change in ink color corresponds to soot ink. Complete disappearance of ink might be indicative of a tannin or mainly deteriorated iron gall ink, and well-preserved iron gall ink loses some of its opacity at dash 940 nm, whatever that means. All the writing inks discussed in this paper are of the iron gall type. In addition, we used ultraviolet UV illumination to enhance the visibility of faded ink, using the fact that tannins in the ink quench the fluorescence of the parchment, resulting in a better contrast of the ink. Before carrying out the second step of our protocol using an XRF, I'm pretty sure I've used an XRF gun, we needed to determine whether a specific spot was a good candidate for further testing. With some exceptions, any spot with more than one layer of ink cannot produce meaningful test results. This is because the XRF spectrometer cannot distinguish between the signal it receives from one layer of ink and that which it receives from another. Multiple layers of ink can be a problem from re-inking, oops, just lost my spot, but also from ink on the other side of the page, since X-rays pass through the parchment. For each test, we had to examine the exact spot we wanted to test using transmission light. That is, shine a light through the back of the parchment in order to verify that there was nothing on the other side. So basically it went through the material. And so now the reason I said I'm pretty sure I've used an XRF gun, that tests gold. And so XRF, yeah, a non-destructive analytical technique that determines elemental composition of a material by exposing it to X-rays. So we would use this huge big gun and put it onto rocks, and it would tell you what was in the rocks, certain percentage of zinc or gold or copper or whatever was in there. So people would come along with rocks and you could tell if it had gold in it, which is quite interesting. Yeah, so I'll just quickly show you that. So it says here, an X-ray fluorescence XRF spectrometer is an X-ray instrument used for routine, relatively non-destructive chemical analysis of rocks, minerals, and sediments and fluids. Okay, so just so I'm not making this up. So when I was in Papua New Guinea, I was helping a friend out, and he was starting up a gold business there. And so lots of people over the years had contacted me and said, we got a ton of gold. We want to try and get it to Australia. And so we worked out how to do that. And we were testing stuff everywhere. But the advice that I'd given them previously was that they actually melt the gold down and wear it as jewelry into Australia. And so I think that actually done that. So we turned up there and we were testing rocks for weeks and there was nothing. And so, but there was a gold rush there at the same time. And so they had trouble getting kids to go to school because there was so much gold in the rivers and things like that. And so they'd already worked out their channels and they were getting it to where they needed to get it. So we just went, oh, let's forget this. But we had some guys from Australia come over who had all the proper licenses and everything. It was all legal. But they had an XRF gun. And so he showed me how to use that. We were using it every day when we were there. So that's the only reason I saw XRF and thought, I know that. Okay, so multiple layers of ink can be problematic from inking, but also from ink on the other side of the page since X-rays pass through the parchment. For each test, we had to examine the exact spot we wanted to test. And so we made sure it didn't go through the other side. Micro X-ray fluorescence. A second step of our protocol involved identification of metals in the ink by means of micro X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. So that's the fancy way of saying XRF analysis, which is also a non-invasive, non-destructive process. An object irradiated with kilo electron volt X-rays responds with an X-ray emission, which is typical of its chemical elements, delivering therefore the elemental composition of the object. So just like we were going over rocks and you could tell how much zinc was in there, how much copper was in there, how much gold was in there. It's the same type of process. So let's just have a look at some of these pictures first. So here we have Nehemiah Gordon. So obviously Nehemiah, he was on our program a few weeks back, probably about a month ago now. And he's sitting there in the Vatican Library. So Nehemiah is not a Christian. He is Jewish, and he follows the Old Testament, as we would call it as Christians. But here he is scanning the document, and he has this XRF gun type of thing, examining the inks. So it's very interesting. Here it has Figure 2A, Nehemiah Gordon examining bifolio of Codex Vaticanus with a dynalight. Okay, so that might be a different type of technology. Mounted on a custom light stand. The surface of the parchment is protected from the dynalight with a layer of Melinex. The light table beneath the bifolio was used to shine light through the parchment to verify that there was no ink on the other side of the specific spot wanted to later test with the XRF. So it seems like that was done later on. Each spot was imagined at -50 times magnification in 1 visible, 2 ultraviolet, -395 nm, and 3 near infrared, -940 nm, and 4 transmission. And then it has here B, detailed view of the instrument. So that's this one here. So it's a pretty fancy looking bit of equipment, and it looks like it just goes straight into your laptop. So that's modern technology for you. So here's a page of Vaticanus, so you can see how big it is to the human hand. It's quite interesting. So let's look at some of these other pictures that we've just skipped by. So I'll make that a little bit smaller. So here we can see this is numbered A, B, C, D. So the apricot Distigmai in the left margin of 1332 B10 is visible, A, transmission, B, near infrared, and C, and ultraviolet, and D, light. Okay, so this is basically just explaining, how they got to their conclusions by going through these different lighting compositions, I guess you call it. To the right of the Distigmai, I might just have to make that a bit smaller. To the right of the Distigmai, so it's a singular, is a gamma, Gar, Luke 14:14, in which the original ink is visible on the left and partially covered on the right by the darker ink of the re-inker. Okay, so where is that? To the right of the Distigmai. Yeah, that's interesting. So here you can see the original there, and then you can see someone's written over the top here. And so that's quite interesting. Yeah, just trying to sort of figure things out here. Now, I won't go through and bore you with all the details because that's what I don't want this video just to turn into a bore session where you're just hearing all these fancy words and me struggling to say them. But basically, there's the details. Later on, I'll put this link into the chat and so that you can look at it yourself. Okay, so here is a bifolio of Codex Vaticanus mounted beneath the Artax 800 XRF spectrometer. The archival mounting board has a hole beneath the part of the bifolio being tested and is raised off the table to avoid picking up any signals from anything other than the manuscript. Ira Rabin operates the Artax using the laptop on the left, while the laptop on the right displays the Dynalite images taken during an earlier session to help guide her in finding the precise spot to perform the test. The red light at the top warns that X-rays are actively being emitted. So that's interesting. I guess those shields there are what stop the X-rays from going into the person. When we were using the XRF gun, we didn't have any protection, I don't think. Now we put something behind it, that's right, so it wouldn't. You could get a more accurate reading. So here's a picture of the Pope on the wall. So they're obviously in the Vatican Library there. So that's a pretty amazing machine to have, and so that would be a fantastic thing to test Sinaiticus with. And so I think that was as far as we got. Yeah, and then it gets into some more details. So I've been talking for nearly an hour, and it's pretty complicated. So we got to here. So I'll keep reading in a sec, but maybe I'll just quickly go through some of these comments. Matt Singleton's in the house. Is this Startung? Startung. I'm not sure what that means, but maybe starting. Hi, Nick and Matthew. Matt Singleton says spectroscopier. Spectroscopier. Maybe I pronounced something wrong there. Bowls the Lion is in the house. Hudson says, Truth is Christ, a YouTube channel, just uploaded a video on Codex Sinaiticus. It was an interesting short clip from a documentary they're working on. Okay, it sounds interesting. Yeah, I think that was on the Textus Receptus Academy page. I saw that this morning. Bob is in the house. Hilly Billy is living the dream. He says, welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Docky is loving everything, loving life. Hilly Billy says, Nick, there's a guy in my study group from a well-connected family. He inherited one of those rings that is supposed to get him access to the Vatican. Okay. He wants me to go with him there, but I am not in any shape for an adventure. His father was a well-known screenwriter. That ring has been valued at north of 500k. Most likely candidate for BAM that I can find is BAM Malanto.Italy. BAM. Okay. Milano, sorry. Milano. Yeah. Biblioteca degli Alberi Milano. Okay, so the Milan Library, basically. If I translate that to English, it might tell me. No, that's a... Okay, anyway. I'll move away from there. Hilly Billy says, that's where the Hebrew Gospels of John and Luke I sent you come from, Nick. Nehemiah copied them from the Vatican. Okay, very interesting. I couldn't read the Italian. Yeah, I was just struggling myself. But thanks for that. That's very helpful. Okay, I'll continue on through this. So let's make it nice and big for my poor eyes. To compare different iron gall inks, we employ a modified semi-quantitative fingerprint model. In short, the XRF spectra are mathematically fitted using the native Artex software. The contribution of the parchment is subtracted, and the net peak intensifiers of the metallic impurities found in the vitriol precursor and are calculated and normalized to that of iron. The main chemical element in iron gall ink. Okay, so that's the main element. The resulting characteristic ratios do not depend on the ink thickness and constitute what is referred to as metallic fingerprint for each ink. That's very interesting. So it's got its own little fingerprint, its own distinct markers. We used Artex 800, a scanning 30-watt XRF spectrometer, Bruker Nano GmbH, that features a monobdelum X-ray tube focusing polycapillary optics with an interaction of those numbers there. I'm not going to read through all that. And so I might skip over some of these details. We sometimes performed multiple shorter scans on the scribal feature and combined the results. Okay, so iron gall ink. Iron gall ink utilize inks. They utilize a chemical reaction between a soluble iron compound such as iron sulfate and gallic acid or tannic acid extracted from gall nuts or tree bark. The reaction produces an ink that turns black upon oxidation in air. Iron gall ink degrades with time, changing its color to various shades of brown. The earliest reference to this chemical reaction, a precursor to iron gall ink, is thought to be a recipe of Philo of Byzantium, 3rd century BCE. Philo's recipe describes an ink made of gall nut water that is invisible on leather, which turns visible when rubbed with a sponge soaked with a solution of colcoanthus. Colcoanthus, literally flower of copper. As the name implies, the ancients believed colcoanthus was a pure copper compound. However, it would never produce a black ink without iron. So then we've got a history lesson on the inks. The earliest inks with tannin and chalcanthon were found in the 4th century BCE and are closely followed by signatures of names in Greek in bilingual papyri from the period 253 to 98 BCE, and a Greek documentary text from the 2nd century CE. All these inks contain copper rather than iron, which would never produce a black color. To obtain black ink, soot was sometimes added, leading to a variety of mixed ink. A copper-based substance also mentioned as an ingredient in some of the iron gall ink recipes, but it must have been iron inadvertently included with the copper that produced the black color of such inks. Hence, it may be best to translate chalcanthon as metallic sulfates, even though iron sulfate was the key ingredient that contributed to the blackness of iron gall ink in the absence of carbon soot. So it's getting quite technical here, but let's continue. The earliest known examples of iron gall ink confirmed through the instrumental analysis were the Vercelli Gospels Codex on parchment in Latin from the mid-4th century, and a number of Coptic papyri from the 4th to 5th centuries, with the most notable being the Acmimic Book of Proverbs that's in Berlin, and the Roll of Athanasius. Our Dino-Light reflectography, I should say, examinations together with the XRF tests found that the inks in Codex Vaticanus currently under discussion were all of the iron gall type, which particularly lose opacity under near infrared light. So you can see that in figures 3, 9, and 11, which I won't scroll around and mess everything up at the moment. We'll look later. The original ink of Codex Vaticanus can now be added to the handful of the earliest examples of iron gall ink proven through instrumental analysis, and the oldest example of iron gall ink currently confirmed in Greek. So I'm not sure if they've age tested this, or they're saying, we know Codex Vaticanus is a 4th century manuscript, now this is the oldest one. Yeah, and so I guess I'll leave that up to other people to discuss. No doubt this will come on the ETC blog. People like Elijah Hixson and Peter Gurry, they'll weigh in on it, and maybe even James Snap and others, they'll talk about it. In the 1st century CE, the Greek physician Pedanius, Dioscorides, and the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder described ancient techniques for obtaining this. I keep trying to say it, but it's I'm struggling. One source was stalagmites and stalactites that form from naturally occurring sulfate solutions dripping in caves and mines. The ancients learned that they could also create such stalagmites and stalactites. I knew I sort of knew that word, but by directing sulfate solutions into specially dug pits. A third method involved precipitating the chalcanthon out of naturally or artificially prepared sulfate solutions. So it's going into the details in Latin and all sorts of things. So I probably will just skip through this because I don't think it's really that edifying to everyone to sort of go through the compositions of this. Here we are. In the ancient and medieval world, there was no awareness that vitriol contained impurities. By the 16th century, however, it was common to chemically purify the vitriolic solutions from which vitriol was extracted using cementation process. This consisted of immersing solid iron in the vitriolic solution, causing the copper to precipitate out. The purpose was not to purify the vitriolic solution, it was to extract copper. But the byproduct was an iron-enriched vitriolic solution nearly devoid of copper. The Chinese began using the cementation process on a commercial scale to extract copper from vitriolic solutions in 1086. The earliest confirmed evidence for the cementation process in Europe comes from the town protocol of Smolnik from the year 1439. The Swiss alchemist Paracelsus from 1493 to 1541 brought cementation as proof that alchemy could transmute iron into copper, even though transmuting base metals into gold eluded him. The Italian metallurgist Vernocchio Biringuccio, that's terrible, seemed to have understood that the copper came from the vitriolic solution itself. So it's just going into these type of things. So I'm going to skip over some of this. So it's going back into the XRF material. Okay. Going into the data of that material. Talking about how much copper it's got in it, how much is it. Remember I was saying before we use these XRF guns. It would tell you how much zinc. It would tell you percentages. Okay, so they were comparing. Comparison with the parchment spectrum dotted reveals a significant presence of iron, followed by the enhancement of copper in both ink spectra. So I think I will skip that as well, as it gets quite complicated. They're testing the Arabic numerals. So here we have a diagram here. The XRF spectra light reflecting the metallic impurities of raw, unpurified vitriol. So they're testing the re-inked, the original, and then the parchment. So, I mean, a lot of people are like, have they tested the age of Vaticanus? You know what I mean? Like, it just seems like they've only just sort of tested, some of these questionable things. But I think there has to be some sort of way of, looking at this ink that's underneath. What they would call the original theta here. Anyway, let's just continue reading or skipping over all this chemical analysis. So throughout the Codex, we performed 62 tests on 32 Distigmai, sometimes testing both the left dot and the right dot, or multiple tests on a single dot. This included 20 tests on 10 apricot Distigmai, 35 tests on 20 chocolate Distigmai, and 3 tests on a Distigmai said to have been added later. So that's good. They did that thorough test. and they tested the one that was in the more modern part from the 15th century. So among these were 9 tests on 4 chocolate Distigmai and 5 tests on the 3 apricot Distigmai that were part of the 15 Distigmai obolos pairs hypothesized to have been penned by the original 4th century scribe, and in the case of the chocolate, later re-inked. The intensity of the copper to iron in all these tests of the Distigmai was between 0.00 and 0.02. The first major result of our tests was that there was no difference between any of the Distigmai, whether apricot or chocolate, as far as the XRF test could detect. The Distigmai, said to have been added later, was identical to the apricot and chocolate Distigmai. The Distigmai on the 15th century parchment page was also no different from the apricot and chocolate Distigmai. All the Distigmai tested have 15 amounts of metallic impurities, indicating that they were written with ink or inks made from vitriol that was chemically purified. As a result, there is no reasonable chance that the Distigmai were written in the 4th century. Indeed, based on the current state of knowledge, ink made from chemically purified vitriol is unlikely to be much earlier than the 16th century. So it's very interesting. It solves a lot of issues. The presumption that the chocolate Distigmai have apricot Distigmai hidden underneath them ostensibly posed a methodological problem for our technique. If the XRF test had found significant amounts of metallic impurities in the chocolate Distigmai, there would be no way to know which portion of the signal came from the visible chocolate layer and which came from the presumed hidden apricot layer. However, the near lack of metallic impurities in the ink of the chocolate Distigmai means that even if there were apricot Distigmai hidden beneath them, neither layer had significant amounts of metallic impurities. The second very important result of our tests is that the Distigmai were not written using the ink used to write the original main text in the 4th century. Indeed, the elemental profile of the Distigmai contrasts sharply with the elemental fingerprints of the original main text and its re-inking. The original main text had copper to iron values ranging from 0.10 all the way up to 0.38, indicating that different parts of the Codex were written with different inks or different batches of ink. It is not unusual for a lengthy manuscript to be written with inks that have a range of elemental fingerprints. As a scribe runs out of ink, he would replace it with another batch that may have used vitriol with different metallic impurities. However, what is surprising is that the re-inking of the main text had a range of copper values from 0.09 to 0.38, the same range of ink seen in the original text. On some pages, the original ink has a distinct elemental fingerprint from that of the re-inker, and of the other pages, the elemental fingerprints are indistinguishable. Curiously, on some pages, the original ink had a different fingerprint from that of the re-inker on that page, but a fingerprint that is put a few pages down, indistinguishable from that of the re-inker on a different page. So I'll just read down to 3.3 here, and we'll go and check all this out. This is so profoundly unusual that it requires a future study of its own. This is very interesting. So what they're saying is there's certain inks that are used that they're being penned over, and they seem to have the same amount of metallic organisms in there. I guess not organisms because they're living, but it's like elements, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But then on another page, there's a huge distinction, but then it seems to swap on the next page. And so it's almost like it's almost like it was penned over straight away. That's what I'm getting, unless you're getting something else. Whatever the explanation, we carried out 104 tests on the original main inks. This is very interesting. And 58 tests on the re-inking of the main text, and none of these tests had an elemental profile nearly devoid of metallic impurities, as consistently found in both the apricot and chocolate Distigmai. In other words, the Distigmai with the apricot or chocolate were not written in the same inks as the original text, nor were they written in the same inks as the re-inking. So, but everyone's looking, going, so what? Tell us more about these original inks, because I mean, people have all, gone, okay, if it's 4th century, it means this. If it's 16th century, it means that. So they've gone, okay, it's 16th century. So we're like, okay, that's fine. But most of us are like, but what about their text? When can we pinpoint that? So I don't think they go into it. They just are looking at the dots, and that's it. So these are the dots tested. It's got the elements here and how much is in there, and that can give you the details for that. What we had before that was things that they know are, from later on, chapter 3. A table of contents with a vita with a line above it. Most of the Greek numbers, they have the line there in the manuscripts. An Arabic numeral, which is quite interesting. Another Arabic numeral. And so they're testing these type of things and testing the parchment, testing the ink, and it says here a lot of complicated stuff, which I won't read. Okay. Now let's just see if these comments are coming up. Malim Denim. Okay. I have a cutter here with Malim Denim jaws, extremely hard. In alchemy, chalcanthum, also called chalcanth or calcanthum, was used for the compound blue vitriol and the ink made from it. The term was also applied to red vitriol and to green vitriol, from Wikipedia. Okay. I wonder if it's relative to chalcedony, as mentioned in Scripture. I think it's in the book of Revelation. It talks about that. Unre-inked and re-inked pairs. So I'm again going to sort of skip over anything that just looks too complicated. Distinguishing between the original inks and that of the re-inker admittedly posed a methodological problem of its own. Our identification of each of these respective categories hinged on our visual appraisal of their color and appearance, which can be at times subjective. Indeed, in some instances, it is difficult to distinguish the original ink from that of the re-inker based on color alone. To complicate matters, Versace argued that the entire Codex was re-inked twice, once in the 10th to 11th centuries by a re-inker using ochre colored ink. Ochre is sort of like a reddy, browny sort of ink. And again in the 16th century by a re-inker using dark colored ink. a topic that will be explored in a future study. So that's interesting. He's going to continue to go through the inks of Vaticanus, and I'm hoping that this will lead to a thorough investigation of the age of Vaticanus. To be cautious in overcoming this methodological challenge, we can narrow our comparison to the subset of re-inked letters at the end of a line that were replaced with the same letter in the left margin of the following line. This may have been because the original scribe and the re-inker had different ideas about the syllabification. Why does syllabification have so many syllables in it of a word? According to Versace, these letters were replaced by the ochre re-inker in the 10th to 11th centuries, but not inked by the dark re-inker of the 16th century. Our examination at 50x magnification confirms that in each case, the letter added by the re-inker on the second line does not appear to have two layers of ink. It's interesting. We tested 8 pairs of this type. In some instances, the original ink had the same elemental fingerprint as the re-inker's replacement on the next line, and in others, they were distinct. The copper values of the original letters ranged from 0.12 to 0.37, and that the letters inscribed by the re-inker on the next line range from 0.17 to 0.36. Okay, so here we have all the, left-hand side, right-hand side, chocolate ink. It's got the amount of copper, the amount of zinc. Okay, so we might make that a little bit smaller so we can put it into perspective. The original ink is sometimes difficult to distinguish from that of the re-inker based on color alone. Note the re-inked zeta and sigma. Okay, so here we have a zeta and a sigma. Interesting, yeah. So yeah, we see this is very dark. And I guess too, as they get down to the bottom of the ink well, it could, unless they continue to stir it, it would get darker and darker. It's like if you've got a coffee and you put sugar in it and, it sort of sinks to the bottom, unless you're just stirring it all the way through or shaking it, you end up with all these chunks down the bottom, which could make it dark. And so here we have this zeta here, which you can tell it's been re-inked, but it doesn't look that much darker. And here you have a sigma, and it's not that much darker. It's not as dark as these other letters, the phi and the alpha, etc., or the sigma next to it. So it seems, but I guess too, if they had been more accurate it seems like when it's actually on the line, it's dark. So if they're actually on top of it, it seems to get darker. So perhaps that was one of the things as well. If they'd actually gone not next to it, but just right on top of it, it would have been darker. And I guess that creates a level of protection, putting 2 coats of clear varnish on a table. And so if you've got 1 coat of varnish, it's going to fade quicker than 2 coats. And so the ones that have the 2, they tend to have lasted longer and be darker. So yeah, it's interesting. That's just a theory. Anyway, so it says down here, pairs of unre-inked letters at the bottom of the line, top, replaced by the re-inker in the left margin of the following line. So I guess that this is what they do sometimes with older books. They would have, say, John ran to, and then the next page would say the shop. So they would have the word the there just at the bottom. So you would know that that's the next word that you're supposed to read. So just in case you skipped a page or something like that. So it seems like they did this in the ancient world, or I'm saying ancient world. It could be, well, I'm not sure of the dates until it's fully scientifically tested for dates. They're just saying it's 4th century. I'm not really sure. It could be. It might not be. But it seems that this was a pattern where they had the kappa here was not inked, and then that continued on in the next line, sort of thing. So that's interesting. Okay, so it says here another subset that we can compare the Distigmai. We compare to the Distigmai are unre-inked letters that the re-inker replaced with supralinear orthographic corrections. In such cases, it could be argued that either the original letter or the supralinear correction was re-inked, even though it does not appear to us to be the case examining these letters. 50 times magnification, see figure 9. Okay, so that's figure 8, so that's here. We tested 11 such pairs. The copper values of the original letters range from 0.21 to 0.35, and that the supralinear corrections from 0.15 to 0.38, see table 4. Neither of these subsets differed substantially from the range of elemental fingerprints of the full set of unre-inked and re-inked letters that we tested. At the same time, these subsets were totally dissimilar from the elemental profile of both the apricot and chocolate Distigmai, which had 0.00 to 0.02 copper. This near lack of metallic impurities indicates that the ink used to write the Distigmai was made from vitriol that was chemically purified. Hence, the Distigmai were most likely produced no earlier than the 16th century, when the chemically purifying vitriol became standard. So they've tested these words here. So this is quite interesting. They're giving, they're saying, okay, in some of these letters, it's got this much copper, this much zinc. So I guess it's just up to people who can interpret that. So they've gone through and they're looking at these verses, 2 Chronicles 30:25, Isaiah down to Matthew. So it's quite interesting. So that's the page, the column, the lines, and what letter they tested. So they're testing a lot of sigmas and kappas, nus. Chocolate Distigmai as re-inked apricot. Cannot discovered, I might make this bigger. Kennard discovered what appears to be an apricot Distigmai protruding from the chocolate Distigmai at 1465A3, see figure 10. This example provided an important piece of evidence that chocolate Distigmai were actually re-inked apricot Distigmai, with the original apricot usually hidden beneath the later chocolate ink. We tested the dots of both the chocolate and apricot Distigmai at 1469A3 and measured the intensity of copper and iron in both as 0.01. Despite the difference in their visual appearance, so that's what they're testing there. I'll just keep reading through this and then I'll look back at that. There was no difference as far as the XRF could detect between the apricot Distigmai and the adjacent chocolate Distigmai or Distigmai. A Distigmai in the left margin of 1453A30 has a left dot that appears to be chocolate, whereas the right dot appears to be apricot. The difference in color and thickness between the two dots is obvious in both visible light and transmission. Our tests of 1453A30 found no difference between the dark dot on the left and the light dot on the right, both of which had a copper to iron ratio of 0.01. So that's interesting. So when these are re-inked, these dots are re-inked, they're testing both of these and they're realizing that they're the same, meaning that they're both modern. So that's quite interesting. So Hilly Billy says, that's right. I think ochre is a mineral that natives use to make their hair red. I think it's Maasai tribesmen. It's more of a red, a brick red, earthy red. Okay, brethren, got to go open the gate. Trucks are early. He'll come back later. Okay, thanks, Hilly Billy. So let's look at some of these pictures. Okay, so there's no difference between any of these dots. So some of these dots, you can tell they're put over the top, but they're a little bit missing. So someone's just dabbed them. I mean, it's a huge manuscript. It would take a lot to go through and re-ink everything. But they're testing both of these and they're realizing it's pretty much the same. So they're testing these things here, re-inked and a correction, and they're testing everything there. So okay, now I'll make this a little bit smaller. Very interesting. You have a dark chocolate one and an apricot one. So these are basically the same. Okay. So figure 11, a Distigmai with a dark colored left dot and a light colored right dot. The different thicknesses of ink are noticeable in visible light. And so I actually read this before, I think, but and transmission in near infrared, the inks nearly disappear, characteristic of iron gall inks. Ultraviolet light D enhances the contrast so that the differences in the light and dark dots practically disappear. Note the similarity in color in visible light between the right dot and the original ink of the adjacent kappa. The two dots have the same near lack of metallic impurities. So it's very interesting. Here we have, to the naked eye, we see this. That one, you can almost see the fabric of the manuscript, but when you put it under like an ultraviolet light, they're pretty much the same. And that's one thing when I'm going through older manuscripts or even old print books. Sometimes what I do is I throw it into like Adobe Illustrator or Paint, and I invert the colors, and it can help you to read what's there because it makes everything very dark. And so we examined 158 chocolate Distigmai at 50 times magnification, but did not find convincing evidence of them being the product of systematic re-inking. Most Distigmai had a uniform appearance as far as the color of the ink was concerned. Okay, so that's interesting. And so here we have figure 12. Chocolate Distigmai considered to be re-inked original Distigmai. However, no trace of apricot ink is visible even at 50 times magnification. In contrast, the re-inking of the adjacent eta, it's a letter, eta, at 1280 C10 and the horizontal line and row at 1285 B12 are unmistakable. Okay, interesting. So yeah, it looks like these haven't been re-inked, but obviously these have. So very interesting. To be sure, light-colored ink was visible in some chocolate Distigmai alongside the dark ink. However, it is not certain that this was caused by re-inking. In the case of 1469A3, which was previously explained as an original apricot Distigmai, protruding from the chocolate Distigmai of the re-inker, it is possible that the two sets of dots were the result of a thin and thick application of ink. The thin part of the stroke could be where the pen first touched the parchment. In the case of 1453A30, which had a dark colored left dot and a light colored right dot, the light dot might be a thinner application of the same ink used to produce the dark dot. Wow, that's interesting. So they're saying there are some dots. Now maybe they give a figure 13, so maybe I'll scroll down to that. So they're saying it could be the same pen, but just a different type of pressure. Or I guess too, if you're dipping your pen into this formula, then you're putting it on the page, you might be touching the bottom and getting a whole bunch of metallic stuff or whatever. Well, actually, they're saying there's hardly any metallic stuff there. So just stuff that's floated to the bottom or sunk to the bottom. And then as it's coming back out, it's getting some of this lighter material. But when you dot them on the page, it comes up dark here and a little bit lighter here. So it's actually just the one dot. That's interesting. I'm trying to sort of figure this out, but it's quite complicated. So I think that's what it says there. A dark colored left dot and a light colored right dot. The light dot might be a thinner application of the same ink used to produce the dark dot. The intrusive example of a chocolate Distigmai at 1253A38, which has light-colored ink sticking out from the left side of each dot, we were able to compare this light-colored ink to the dark ink and found them to have the same minute amounts of metallic impurities. The two colors of ink might have been made by a single stroke of the pen, with the lighter ink being a thinner application than the dark. Although it seems unlikely to us, we cannot rule out the possibility that this and other Distigmai were re-inked in the 17th century with dark, chemically purified ink covering the earlier 16th century light-colored, chemically purified ink. Okay, so that's one of their options, is saying, could have been, 1630, that it was done. Or I guess, you had people like, I think, did John Mill, did he have a look at this manuscript, or was he only given information about the manuscript? I'm not sure. But that's an interesting theory. Very interesting. Okay, so we're about halfway through. I've gone for 1 hour and 40 minutes, and I did say that this was part one. Okay, so obviously reading through this and trying to say all these, Latinized and Greek words and all the rest of it, it's quite tiring. So rather than, if I just sit here and just waffle on like I usually do, it's a lot easier for me and my poor little brain. Now, how much more have we got? We've got a few examples. Now, I sort of want to give you the answer before I shut this project up, and I'll go back to where I left off next time. But it does give you the answers at the end and sort of gives you their rough estimation. So it's saying here, these pages, 1519, 6 replacement pages of the main text, 15th century, and it tells you the metallic compound in there. So we see the Arabic numerals have 0.01. I'm pretty sure that's copper and zinc. And so, yeah, it's all very similar. So they're saying 15th century, then 16th century, and then 1571 to 1581. So I'm guessing that would be them looking at some of the apocryphal works, or I guess the Septuagint to make us their Septuagint editions. Yeah, I'm not really sure. So, but we will go through that another time. And I also want to check out some of these names here, because as we saw, we've seen Eldon J. Epp. He's quite well known. There's a lot of well-known people here. We all know James Snap Jr. He gets a mention. Bruce Metzger, Philip Payne. I'm sure I'm skipping over a few that we know. I might just went, D.A. Waite. No, it was a different Edward Waite. Tommy Wasserman. We all know Tommy Wasserman. Yeah, so I'll go through the rest of that tomorrow. But yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. And so I guess some people would be able to read between the lines here. And some people would be able to look at these figures and work out, because they're testing the letters, then they're testing the dots, and they're saying, okay, the dots have this certain compound in it, but they're telling us the compound, the makeup of the letters. And so surely there's been other ancient documents that have been tested. Surely there's artwork that's been tested. And I'm thinking that people should be able to look at the findings here and work out the type of inks that are made, because every era has a different type of technology. So they might have added something to it that made it darker or made it lighter or whatever. But that was like a fad that happened for 200 years, and and they only had that compound, in like the 12th century or something like that. And so yeah, the whole thing of looking at these inks, now we've got all this information. I think it's answered to most people's satisfaction about the dots. But we want to look at the ink. And so this is the thing, I've often heard people like James White saying, even if they did scientifically test them, these King James onlyists wouldn't accept the findings. And it's like, no, I accept it straight away. If it's reasonable, if it's logical, and if it's done properly and it's done openly, of course you accept the findings. But it's when you just don't have any research into it, and you're just saying, no, it's this old, and it's like, well, we want to know, we want to test these things. And so he's just saying that because it's not in their best interest to date all the manuscripts. It's in their best interest just to keep everyone vague for the next 50 years. And, I mean, imagine if they turn around and said this manuscript is only, only like 1300 or something like that, or Sinaiticus was proven to be a forgery, it would just rock their whole industry. And so, so we've got AVBTM in the house saying hi, Nick. It says, I'd like to interview you on my channel. I'm KJV only. Yeah, no worries. Let me know. I've got an email, which is AUSCLIX, and that's at gmail.com. And so if you want to contact me, that's the best way to contact me. And we can set up a time. Because I'm in Australia, usually I try and do things on the weekends. So usually around about the time of 5 in the afternoon, New York time, sort of suits me if it's on a Friday or a Saturday in American time. That seems to suit me because then I can get up early. It's, 7 in the morning here. I can do it nice and early and then sort of move on with my day. But AVBTM says, I've been enjoying watching your previous debates. I love them. You do a great job, brother. Okay, thanks for that. Really appreciate it. That's great. And so, yeah, send me an email, and we'll work out a time that suits us both. But anyway, thanks for watching this, guys. I don't think there's anything else I really want to talk about. I'll just continue on. It's probably only just going to be 2 parts, but maybe I'll find some stuff online. Like I think Dwayne Green's gone through some of James Snap's material on this, and I'm sure people have already chatted about this somewhere. So maybe I can find a little bit of chat, a little bit of banter, and yeah, that'll be a real blessing. So thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.